Hi, my name's Phil Wason, and this is, I think, the fourth in a series of videos called Facilitation in Practice. I said in the last video that I wanted to have a look at some ways of being as a facilitator. Yes, there's some tools, there's some approaches, some very practical issues that we will be addressing. But when you're in the training room, when you're in the workshop, as well as considering whether you're an internal or an external facilitator. We looked at that in the last video. I also want to ask you, how are you going to be? What's your role here? Because there's a whole range, there's a continuum that you can be on, from being very hands-off or low intensity in your role to being very high intensity, very hands-on. You can be absent and have a role simply that people know you're around and they're going to be seeing you. You can be present but silent, just in the room as an observer. You know, quite low intensity. You can start to make your observations known, and that's getting a little bit more higher intensive, a bit more hands-on. You can give feedback, you can ask questions, you can then start to give direction, very high intensity and hands-on. So I just want to explore this whole range of approaches that are available to you, and to just to explore what each one has as its usefulness to you. And they come under two headings. One that I've used very often, these headings. It's the simplest way of considering how to influence anyone or anything, and that is push and pull. The first ones I'm going to look at come under the pull heading, and that simply means where I'm interested in knowing about your world. Tell me about your world. What are the issues you're facing? I want to understand where you're coming from in order to help you. I want to listen in order to understand. I want to be able to understand your world so that we can move together forwards. So it's very much a kind of pull on the client, getting information. And the three headings that come under the pull category, the first one would be, you would call it a catalytic mode. Throwing a pebble in a pond, or just a little, you're just seeding the place, usually through asking great questions. And we'll be spending another session on the art and the beauty of great questions. The how questions, the what questions, the questions that turn on the flow, turn on the tap in conversation. So, tell me more about, what else would you like to say about that? Who else has been involved? Sometimes you're just in acceptant mode, oh, that's interesting, tell me more. And why would that be so? How does that compare with, and so on. It's a very catalytic mode, and it opens up lots of information coming to you. Now, you need to be very inquisitive. I think I've said before, the best advice I could give anyone as a facilitator would be to be genuinely, authentically inquisitive about the people you're working with. Inquisitive, but not an inquisition. So this approach, the catalytic approach, you need to be careful that it doesn't become like a grilling. And especially with the why question. The why question is useful, but it can be overdone. And we'll look at this later on, but it can become a little bit like a court of law. Why did you do that? Why is that the case? It's almost as though you're trying to catch people out. Whereas the other, the how, who, what, when, where questions are far less so. So just be catalytic, stirring up the pot, getting people to think for themselves. That's the approach. You need to watch that you don't do this too much. The questions can appear leading, and it can take an awful lot of your time up. But the beauty of it is that the people, just while you're doing this, the people may come to their own conclusions there and then. And that's it, job done. Simply by asking good questions, they'll come to a realization and take ownership of the situation. So that's the catalytic, and it comes under this heading of pull approaches. The second one would be cathartic. And the cathartic approach is really focusing on the client's emotions, the feelings of an individual or a group of individuals. Because especially at the beginning of a session with people, there are often issues around that have generated a lot of feeling. And if you don't allow for that, if you don't vent, let them vent, it'll come out later on and it'll get in the way of making progress. So there has to be a certain amount of, again, inquisitiveness about where this is coming from, of allowing, of giving permission that it's legitimate for people to feel this way. And your role in this cathartic approach is to reflect back, is to show understanding and empathy, and to just reflect back what you hear people saying, and to try and imagine, even though you can't feel what they're feeling, it's their situation, just to try and show that empathy before pushing on with the rest of the content, if you like. And the third approach under this pull heading, you would call supporting. And very often people are starved of this in organizations. They're starved of support. They might get, a pat on the back, well done, keep it up, you're doing a good job. But they very rarely get what you might call constructive feedback. And certainly they'd be starved of positive feedback, which says, when you did that, that was really helpful. This is the difference it made. I'd like you to continue, and could you help us with this as well? But recognition. People just feel like if they're noticed, if something's been noticed, then they can be supported and they're encouraged. You have to be careful, of course, that you're not patronizing. You can come across that way, even though it's not your intent. And also, you don't always know what there is in the person's experience recently, because you may be an external and you're new to the business, so you don't know what you can support them in. But as soon as they express something that is really positive and you see as a contributing positively towards culture change or towards a resolution of the problem, you want to support them in that and encourage others to support them in that and make sure that what they said that was positive has been heard. So these are all ways in which you can support the person. So as well as those pull methods of intervention as a facilitator, there are also some push. And this is a lot more like direct training sometimes than facilitation, because they are more directive, they are more hands-on. They're less leaving it to the individual and more prescriptive. In fact, one of them is a prescriptive approach. So the push approach is, listen, this is my world. I want you to understand where I'm coming from. Here's some thoughts I want you to listen to. So it's the opposite of the pull we've just been thinking about. And so one would be simply giving information. Now, these are all very useful. It's just knowing when to use them. So informing is great for a lot of people because they may not be aware of certain data, of certain information. It could be a model or a theory that they just find so useful. It could be a network of people or just places to go and find the information that you're passing on. And these can be really useful to people. You need to be clear. You need to know how much information they can take in so that you don't overload them. It needs to be clear, what's this for? Is it relevant? Am I just telling you things because I know them? Why is that important to them? And is it relevant to them? So it needs to be selective information you're passing on, but it can be very powerful. Did you know that? What you're saying reminds me of this. Have you met this person or this theory yet? Or this way of thinking about things. The second approach, the second intervention under this push heading is confronting. So confronting doesn't need to be, certainly isn't aggression or anything like that. It's a kind of a challenge. You might be challenging assumptions. You might be helping people to raise their awareness about issues. You might be pointing out some of the possible consequences of actions they're considering taking. It may, though, confronting, be intentionally to boost their confidence, a little bit like the supporting we were just talking about. So it can be pointing out that people are more able, more competent than they may be giving themselves credit for. So that kind of confronting in a very positive way. And again, we need to know when to do it. We need to be direct, but also give people space to reflect and respond. This is not a putting people into a corner so they have nowhere to go. And of course, we can avoid confronting altogether if we're not careful. And some of us who are maybe a bit more timid might do that very often. And we wish we'd said things later on that would have helped people. So you can either avoid it completely, and that's not good, or you can use it all the time. And you can confront people over relatively trivial things, and it's just not worth it. But when it's a big issue, when it's health and safety or someone's going to get hurt, it's worth confronting sometimes in order to help them. It's always in order to help people. And the final one under this heading, you would call prescripting. So this is where you're in a situation that calls for you to be like a doctor and give a prescription, and especially when there are major issues at stake, or the people are stuck, they don't know where to turn, they've tried everything else, and they just need that support. There are ethical or safety issues involved in this as well, and you need to be aware that you need to leave all of this until it's absolutely necessary, and explain why it is you're making this prescription. It's because you've come to this point and they're not getting there themselves. Is your prescription wanted? Are you open to give this prescription? The danger is you might start taking over and they are kind of emasculated so that they're not making any decisions for themselves. And you could again, if they like your prescriptions, you could again create a kind of dependency so that they keep coming back for more. And it's the antithesis of, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, that's what you're doing with the prescription, but teach a man to fish and you fed him for a lifetime. So you need to be careful of over-prescribing. And I would leave it to a last resort, usually, if you can. It's not that it's a bad thing, it's just don't dive in there straight away. And with all these interventions, I need to be aware of myself, of what's triggering me, of what's producing reactions in me. If I hear someone say something, do I rush to challenge? Do I rush to give a prescription? If people are stuck, do I rush in with my prescription rather than starting the catalytic questioning or inquisitiveness, or keeping drilling down until they get a way forward that they can really own? Because they'll take your prescription if you're prepared to give it to them, and then they'll just come back and say, it didn't work. And that reflects badly on you. So be careful with that prescribing too much, too soon, too frequently. But be aware of yourself and your own needs to be wanted, your own need to be a success, your own need because you're watching the clock and you want a quick resolution rather than the right resolution. And always asking yourself, whose needs are being met here? It's got to be the needs of the client or the clients. It's got to be the needs of the participants and the organization, not my needs. What's the most helpful thing for them? And so just going in the flow of all of this is always going to stand you in good stead. Be inquisitive and always be asking, what is the best for them? Okay, well, we're moving through. We're going to get to some more videos on facilitation in practice. I look forward to the next one.